Good morning. This is a series of Bible lessons prepared and presented by the Pleasant Ridge Church of Christ in Arlington, Texas. My name is Mike Monroe, and for those of you watching this video who may not know me, I'm one of the elders at Pleasant Ridge. For 20 years, I served as Minister of Education, and now in my retirement, I am working part-time as the coordinator of adult education. It's been several weeks now since our regular Bible classes have been able to meet due to what's certainly to go down in history as the great COVID-19 pandemic of 2020. At first, I'd hoped that we would be able to get back to normal and resume our regular schedule of classes by the first of the summer, but of course that hasn't happened. And it looks like now that it's going to be mid-August at the earliest before we're able to get back to any kind of normalcy. And so, this series of lessons has been developed to try to fill at least a part of that gap between now and the time that we're able to come back together in person. These lessons are going to focus on the Tabernacle, the portable shrine that served as ancient Israel's center of worship and sacrifice for nearly 500 years, from the time of the Exodus from Egypt until the time of the construction of Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem. The primary goal of this series is not to focus too much on the structure and the contents and the services of the tabernacle, although we will be touching on these things along the way, and most especially in this first lesson. But the real goal of this study is to discover and understand the imagery that underlay the tabernacle. It was built in to the tabernacle and its services. The Mosaic covenant was an intermediate step along the way to the full revelation of God's plan for redeeming man from sin through the atoning blood of Jesus Christ and the establishment of his church. And as we shall see, the tabernacle was also a symbolic anticipation of something far greater than itself. It was a fleeting shadow of the greater reality of the gospel. And so the title of this study then will be Shadows of the Gospel. I'm going to begin by reading from a text in the New Testament, and that may seem to be a strange place to begin on a study that is decidedly Old Testament like the Tabernacle, but it's going to set the ground for how we want to structure this study. By the way, all of the scripture readings in this series will be taken from the New American Standard Bible. So if yours reads a little bit different, that's the translation that is being used for this series. I'm reading in Hebrews chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. Now even the first covenant had regulations of divine worship and the earthly sanctuary. For there was a tabernacle prepared, the outer one, in which were the lampstand and the table and the sacred bread. This is called the holy place. Behind the second veil, there was a tabernacle which is called the Holy of Holies, having a golden altar of incense and the Ark of the Covenant, covered on all sides with gold, in which was a golden jar holding the manna, and Aaron's rod which budded, and the tables of the covenant. And above it were the cherubim of glory, overshadowing the mercy seat. But of these things we cannot now speak in detail. The author of the letter to the Hebrews, whoever he was, wrote with the purpose of convincing his readers that the gospel of Christ was infinitely superior to the law of Moses. The recipients of this letter were clearly Jewish Christians, possibly second-generation Christians, and for whatever reason, they were feeling drawn away from the gospel and pulled back into a life that was regulated by the law of Moses. And the text that I just read is one plank in the author's argument for the superiority of the gospel of Christ. His point is that the tabernacle had a significance far beyond its primary usage. In its design, its furnishings, and its services, it anticipated something greater than itself. So in this study, we're going to do what the Hebrews author didn't have time to do. We are going to study the imagery and the meaning of the tabernacle in detail. And although most of our biblical references will be taken from the Old Testament books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, we will be referring back to the letter to the Hebrews several times along the way. This first lesson will focus on God's precise and specific instructions for the construction, the assembly, and the transportation of the tabernacle and all of its contents. As we will see, it was of utmost importance that these instructions be followed to the letter. I'm now going to read from the book of Exodus, chapter 25, beginning in verse 1. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the sons of Israel to raise a contribution for me. From every man whose heart moves him, you shall raise my contribution. This is the contribution which you are to raise from them: gold, silver, and bronze, blue, purple, and scarlet material, fine linen, goat hair, ram skins dyed red, porpoise skins, acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for anointing oil and for the fragrant incense, onyx stones and setting stones for the ephod and for the breastpiece. Let them construct a sanctuary for me, that I may dwell among them. According to all that I'm going to show you, as the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furniture, just so shall you construct it." The tabernacle was the one and only authorized sanctuary where the Israelites might worship their God, Yahweh, through the offering of sacrifices required by the law of Moses. The very presence of the tabernacle in their midst and the strict regulations that were imposed with regard to their approach to it were a constant reminder to the Israelite people that their God was holy and they were not. Therefore, God made it clear to Moses that it was very important for the tabernacle to be constructed and maintained exactly according to the pattern given him on Mount Sinai. People must approach God on his own terms. The tabernacle was built very early in the period of the Israelites' wilderness wandering, so it had to be easily portable. Whenever they broke camp, the tabernacle had to be easily disassembled, stored, transported, and then easily set up again at their next campsite. When I first learned about the tabernacle in my children's Bible school classes, I was given the impression that it was basically just a tent. But that was not exactly accurate. A tent consists of sheets of material that are stretched over a minimal frame and pegged to the ground with guy wires. It gives a certain amount of protection from the elements, a little bit of shelter, but there's not much to it. The tabernacle was much more substantial and much larger than a common tent. And the details for the construction of the tabernacle are given in the book of Exodus. They are subject to interpretation. They're a little bit confusing, hard to understand in places, but they do give us a general idea of how the tabernacle was constructed and what it might have looked like. The skeleton of the tabernacle, if you'd like to call it that, consisted of 46 boards or possibly hollow frames made of acacia wood, each measuring 15 feet tall and 2¼ feet wide. Each board was made with 2 pennons projecting from the bottom, which could be inserted into silver sockets, allowing the boards to stand upright and be placed side by side to form a solid, rigid wall. Now, these walls were then stabilized by 5 poles running horizontally from top to bottom, and the boards and the poles were all covered with gold. The tabernacle dimensions were 45 feet long, 15 feet wide, including the corner pieces for joining the walls, and 15 feet tall. These specifics for the construction of the tabernacle are found in Exodus 26, verses 15 to 30. Once erected, this wooden structure was then covered with several sheets or veils of various kinds of fabric, and that would give the tabernacle a tent-like appearance. We can read about this in Exodus 26, 1 to 14. The innermost veil was woven of beautifully colored material. The outside veil was made of the skin of an aquatic animal, and that would have provided a waterproof exterior. The two other veils in between these were probably there to provide a measure of insulation and to maintain a comfortable working temperature within the tabernacle. The interior of the tabernacle was divided into two rooms. Again, that's from Exodus 26. A hanging curtain was set 15 feet forward of the back wall, and it was partitioned off a room in the rear that was called the Holy of Holies. This was the most sacred part of the tabernacle, and it contained a chest called the Ark of the Covenant, which we will learn more about later. Now, the area in front of the veil separating off the Holy of Holies was called the Holy Place. This was the room where the priests carried out many of their activities. The Holy Place contained a golden lampstand with 7 branches, a table for the placement of sacred bread, and a small altar for burning incense. And then another curtain was suspended over the open east end of the tabernacle to form the entrance. The tabernacle proper was enclosed by a large outer court, and the dimensions of that outer court were 150 feet by 75 feet. And for perspective, that's almost a quarter the size of an American football field. This court was enclosed by linen curtains standing 7.5 feet high and suspended from pillars that were set in sockets of bronze. Not as precious of metal was used for the outer court as was used for the tabernacle itself. The outer court contained a large altar for sacrifices and a wash basin called a laver for ceremonial washings. The altar and the laver were both covered with bronze. So, for the purposes that it was designed to serve, the tabernacle was quite an architectural masterpiece. It was aesthetically beautiful, which was only appropriate for the role that it was to serve as the visible dwelling place of God among his people. But it was also structurally sound and durable. The tabernacle was going to have to last a long time, and it was going to have to travel a long way under difficult circumstances. It was going to have to withstand the desert winds and the heat of the Arabian desert for the duration of the wilderness wanderings, which, as we know, turned out to be much longer than they needed to be because of the disobedient and rebellious behavior of the Exodus generation. But it was sound and durable and able to withstand those difficult conditions. And yet, it could easily be taken apart like a jigsaw puzzle, stored, transported across the desert on each leg of the Israelites' wilderness odyssey, and just as easily reassembled when they arrived at the next campsite along the way. So the tabernacle represented the living presence of Yahweh among his people. And whenever Israel set up camp during their journeys, the tabernacle was always placed at the very center of the campsite, with the 12 tribes systematically arranged around it at a respectful distance. The arrangement of the tribal camps around the tabernacle is described in Numbers 2. On the east side, we have the tribe of Judah, which was the standard bearer for a group of 3 tribes. We're not sure of the significance of being the standard bearer, but that's how they were designated. And in the group included with Judah was the tribe of Issachar and the tribe of Zebulun. On the south side, the tribe of Reuben was the standard bearer, teamed up with the tribes of Simeon and Gad. On the west side, we have the tribe of Ephraim as the standard bearer, camped beside the tribe of Manasseh, who in turn was camped beside the tribe of Benjamin. And on the north, Dan was the tribe that was the standard bearer, along with Asher and Naphtali. Now, between the tribal camps of the secular tribes, as we could call them, the non-priestly tribes, between them and the tabernacle, were located the camps of the priests and the Levitical families who were responsible for the care and keeping of the tabernacle itself. The various duties of the Levitical clans and their location in the camp around the tabernacle is given in Numbers chapter 3, verses 23 to 29, and is reiterated in Numbers 4. The clan of Gershon was camped on the west side of the tabernacle. They had custody of all the curtains and veils of the tabernacle, except for the veil that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. That was kept in custody of the priests, and we will see why in just a few minutes. The Levitical clan of Kohath was camped on the south side of the tabernacle. They had custody of all the sacred furnishings and utensils that were used in the tabernacle services, except for the Ark of the Covenant. That was also in the custody of the priests. And then the Levitical clan of Merari was camped on the north side of the tabernacle, and they had custody of all the structural components, the boards, the bars, pillars, sockets, pegs, all of the hardware. On the east side were camped Moses, Aaron, and the priests, who were the sons of Aaron. They had custody of the Ark of the Covenant and the veil that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. It was Aaron and his sons as the priests who performed all the sacred duties within the tabernacle. The Levites could set it up and take it down, but the actual function of conducting the sacrifices, the worship services for the people, was the exclusive possession of the priests. When the Israelites were on their long marches through the wilderness, it was the responsibility of the Levites then to disassemble and transport the tabernacle. And this was a huge task. It has been estimated that the weight of the gold alone that was used in the tabernacle exceeded 1 metric ton. And I looked that up, and a metric ton is 2,205 pounds. That's a lot of gold. And then in addition to that weight, there was the weight of the other things that were used in the tabernacle. It was a huge collection of items to be packed up and moved for long distances. And to facilitate the transportation of the tabernacle, 6 covered carts and 12 oxen were given to the Levites by the secular tribes for that particular purpose. You can read this in Numbers 7. The Gershonites required 2 of these carts and 4 oxen just to carry the curtains and the veils. The Merarites used the other 4 carts and 8 oxen to transport the boards and the pillars and the other hardware related to the tabernacle. But no carts or oxen were assigned to the Kohathites, because the sacred furnishings of the tabernacle were to be carried on their shoulders by rods attached to those pieces specifically for that purpose. The marching order of the tribes and the Levites when they were on the move is given in Numbers 10. When it came time to break camp and move forward, the secular tribes, the Levites, and all of the priests followed a prescribed order of procession. Leading this procession, of course, was the Ark of the Covenant, carried by the priests, covered by the veil that was used to separate the holy place from the Holy of Holies. That, in turn, was covered by 2 other veils, which covered the outer structure of the tabernacle. The ark was borne on the shoulders of the priests, but it was covered, concealed, so that no one could look at it. The ark was so holy that not only could no one touch it, but no one except the high priest was even allowed to look at it, and that only on rare occasions. Behind the priest, leading off for the secular tribes, was the standard-bearing tribe of Judah, followed by Issachar and Zebulun, and then behind them were the Levitical clans of Gershon and Merari. with their carts and their oxen carrying their assigned components of the tabernacle structure. They were followed by the standard-bearing tribe of Reuben and their partner tribes, Simeon and Gad. Behind them was the Levitical clan of Kohath, bearing on their shoulders the sacred furnishings and utensils of the tabernacle, and these too were covered by more of the veils. And by the time they arrived at the next campsite, the Gershonites and the Merarites would have already finished assembling the tabernacle structure, and the Kohathites could then just walk in and set up all the sacred furnishings where they belonged without any delay. And following them came the standard-bearing tribe of Ephraim, followed by Manasseh and Benjamin, and the rear guard was led by the standard-bearing tribe of Dan, followed by Asher and Naphtali. Now, whether in camp or on the march, those secular tribes, that is, those that were not Levites, were to maintain a most respectful distance from the tabernacle and its contents. For reference on that, look in Numbers 2. Any layman who drew near to the tabernacle was to be put to death. You can read that in Numbers 1, verse 51, again in Numbers 3 and verse 10. Even the sons of Kohath, the Levites who carried these sacred furnishings and placed them within the tabernacle, they were not to approach these objects until they had been properly covered by the priests. That's in number 4. If they touched those objects themselves rather than carrying them by the poles that had been provided, they would die. If they even entered the tabernacle to look at the holy objects before they had been properly covered, they would die. And precisely because the tabernacle represented the presence of God in the midst of his people, it was imperative that it be treated and regarded with utmost reverence. Now, as we draw this lesson to a conclusion, I want to read you a text from the 9th chapter of Numbers, verses 15 to 17. Now, on that day that the tabernacle was erected, the cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of the testimony, and in the evening it was like the appearance of fire over the tabernacle until morning. So it was continuously. The cloud would cover it by day, and the appearance of fire by night. Whenever the cloud was lifted from over the tent, afterward the sons of Israel would then set out. And in the place where the cloud settled down, there the sons of Israel would camp. It has been estimated by some scholars, extrapolating from the 603,550 men of military age that were counted at the beginning of the Exodus sojourn, it's estimated that as many as 6 million people may have begun the Exodus wandering from Egypt. And the logistics simply for moving that many people across 400 miles of Arabian desert, let alone providing them with food and water and basic sanitation, it's just mind-boggling. It simply could not have been done without divine help. But as we read the books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, we discover that God made expert provision for all of these logistical problems. And that was another reason why it was important for Israel to obey carefully and precisely all of God's commands concerning their journey. Their physical survival depended on it, just as their spiritual relationship with God did. Glenn Pemberton is a professor in the Bible department at Abilene Christian University. He is a specialist in the Old Testament, and he has accurately observed that the key question to understanding the book of Leviticus, which is a terribly laborious book to read, but he said the key to understanding that book is, how can a holy God dwell among the people he loves without killing them? How can a holy God dwell among an unholy people and be their God. That same principle really applies to understanding the entirety of the law of Moses, and especially the regulations regarding the tabernacle. In giving Israel the tabernacle, God was providing a way for his holy presence to dwell in their midst. And any departure from God's specific commands with regard to the construction or the use of the tabernacle could have very lethal consequences. The regulations for the priestly ministry that took place in the tabernacle are largely contained in the book of Leviticus. And in the lessons to follow, we're going to take a closer look at the various rooms or precincts of the tabernacle, the furnishings that were contained in each one, and the role that they all played in the spiritual life of the Israelites. The author of the letter to the Hebrews noted that the tabernacle, its ministry, were all only a copy and a shadow of heavenly things. Hebrews 8 and verse 5. So as we continue this study, we will especially be looking for the heavenly realities of which the temporal copies of the tabernacle were only a shadow.